That's a picture of me in 2011, 2 years before I hit rock bottom from 15 years of chronic heroin addiction. It's hard to put into words the pain, the emotional turmoil, and the darkness I was feeling in that time. But despite those challenges, I still kept my job. How the hell did I keep my job? I was working for a company designing, ironically, methadone and anti-anxiety medication for Big Pharma. And even in that picture there, I still held down my job. Now, how did that actually happen? How was I able to pull that off? And there's a couple of threads and a couple of reasons for this. The first one is that the idea that we have of an addict or an alcoholic, that stereotypical example, is not really true. It's much more nuanced and much more complex than that. I was a functional addict for much of that time. It got harder as I got longer into addiction, and whether I was functional or not is debatable near the end. But many people that are struggling with addiction are functional addicts. And I was quite good at my job for many of those years. Another element is that addiction, the core of addiction is to escape or avoid some kind of emotional pain. I didn't have an addiction problem per se. I had a trauma, an anxiety, and a panic attack problem. So when I was working in the job, the people I worked with, they were like family. They were caring. They were really good people. I worked with them for many, many years. So they had empathy. They knew the struggles that I faced with anxiety. They knew the struggles that I faced with addiction. And because of that, it created a lot of challenges for them to really let me go and feed me to the wolves, per se. They were trying to protect me. So there was an awful lot of empathy in the room as well. So that was another big reason why I kept my job. And part of that, I got really challenging at some stages. As I said, I worked in the pharmaceutical industry as a graphic artist. There's a big difference between 2.5 milligrams and 25 milligrams. Yet I was at the computer designing these labels. And it got to the stage where I was getting so bad in the depths of addiction. It took me 15 years to really hit my rock bottom. But after about 12, 13 years, I was getting there. And it got to the stage where they would literally have to hide me when customers would come in. Edel, who was the quality manager, there'd be a pharmaceutical company coming in for an audit, and she'd say to my manager, Wayne, can you get Brian offside just until we come through the department? So they were looking out for me, but they enabled my addiction. It came from love, it came from care, but it was a sense of enabling. And that was a real problem, and that's what can happen with many people. Now, luckily for me, it didn't feel lucky at the time, but we merged with another company called the Clondalkin Group. So we merged with a big group, and we were put into this open plan office with other people that I never worked with before. And it wasn't long before they were saying, what the hell is wrong with that guy? Like, I struggled to stay conscious doing my job, especially on the night shifts. It's a minimum requirement to do your job, stay awake. And I was struggling to keep my eyes open at times, and they were like, what is wrong with that guy? How is he still working here? So it quickly escalated, and before long, I was having a meeting to hold my job. I was with the factory manager, the group manager, and the union reps. The union reps happened to be two of my best friends, still friends today. One was my manager, Wayne, and the other was a guy I worked on shift with called Mick. And we went into that meeting to save my job. We were literally there to save my job, to see could we do something about it. And after the meeting, I can smile about it now. After the meeting, I went to Wayne and I said, Wayne, I think that went okay, did it? And he looked at me and he says, Brian, you fell asleep. So literally in the meeting to save my job, I went unconscious and the four of them were in the room looking at me. So that sounds like a very challenging and difficult place for me to be, and of course it was. But that was the catalyst for change. That set the ball running to completely change my life. Soon after that, I knew my job was gone. So that was a big funder of my addiction. My addiction, the money I got from my job, I was in an incredible amount of debt, 50,000 euro in debt to money lenders, drug dealers and banks. And my job paid those bills and funded my addiction. So I was in a lot of trouble at this stage. And I went to the clinic where I was a registered addict and I says, look, I'm in a bad way. I've lost all the relationships in my life. My family had to move away from me because I was causing them so much pain. I'd no way of earning money anymore. And I was literally on death's door. I really was. So I asked him, I need to try to get clean. I need to try to break free. I didn't think I could live in a world because I struggled so much with anxiety. I didn't think I could live without drugs to escape that pain. But I had to try something else. So when I asked the clinic, what's the next steps? They told me because I was taking such a combination of drugs, I was taking copious amounts of benzodiazepine, more commonly known as Valium or Xanax, along with heroin, methadone, alcohol, anything else to numb that pain. But because I was taking so many benzodiazepine, they said I was at risk of having a seizure, so I couldn't go into an opiate detox. I needed to do a specific benzo detox first. I says, where is it? I'm ready to do this. I need to do this now. And he says, there's not a bed available for at least 4 or 5 months. So I didn't know what to do at this stage. I knew I was in trouble and I says, I've got to do this now. I need to do this now. But there was no option for me. So against medical advice, I decided to do a detox, a benzo detox, at home on my own. And 2 days into that detox was not only the most painful night in my life, it was also the most important night in my life. And I woke up on my sitting room floor and there was blood everywhere. And what had happened was I had a grand mal convulsive seizure, a benzo seizure. What happens when you have a seizure is every neuron in your brain fires at the same time. It's like a cascading effect firing across your brain. And it was convulsing, twisting and pulsing on the floor. My younger brother, lovely sensitive guy, he was minding me while I was going through withdrawals. He didn't know what was going on. He was trying to grab me. I was twisting, seizing, getting stiff on the floor. He didn't know what was going on. And at the very last convulsion, apparently a slump at the end of a seizure, my last convulsion literally drove my teeth up into my tongue and I split it down the centre, blood pouring on the floor. And I've a sort of a glimpse of a memory of just James screaming down the phone to me dad, I think Brian's dead. I think Brian's dead. But despite all of the challenges that I caused my family, they are absolute heroes, they really are. And they rallied around me like they always did when I really needed them. They came up to the house, they got me to hospital, got an ambulance. I was brought to Blanchardstown Hospital. And I woke up later that night in the hospital. I came to in the hospital and I was sitting in a room on my own. And I was so broken, mentally, emotionally and physically broken. And I felt like I had a bag of needles just squeezing in my mouth. And I never wanted to escape the pain, emotional and physical pain I was feeling in that moment, but I just hadn't got the strength. I was so broken, I really was. So I just sort of peeled myself up off the trolley. I remember my legs dangling off the side and I sort of slumped forwards. My elbows landed on my knees and my face landed in my hands. And I was just slumped over, staring at the wall, feeling sorry for myself. And I began looking at this fire extinguisher that was hanging on the wall. And I'll never forget this moment. I went into this kind of a zone, this tunnel vision, staring at this fire extinguisher. And all of a sudden I had this sense of something is not quite right here. And I got that feeling in the pit of my stomach and I realised I didn't really know what that object was. I was like, I know what that is. I should know what that is. What is that? And I was like something was broken cognitively. I couldn't bring it to mind. And I began to panic, looking around the rest of the room, trying to label my environment. And my brain was not working. And I remember in that moment just saying to myself, oh my God, that's brain damage. You've destroyed your brain. Game over. There is no coming back from this. And I remember in that moment just waiting to be overwhelmed and consumed by the anxiety that chased me my entire life. And I just remember thinking, I can't do this anymore. I can't fight this anymore. I'm done. I give up. And as I lay back down on the trolley, instead of being overwhelmed by the anxiety, I felt a sense of peace come over me. And what I retrospectively realised, that was the first time I stopped fighting anxiety. The first time I stopped resisting reality. I stopped fighting with my own mind. It was a sense of surrender, a sense of letting go. And I truly believe that that was the moment that completely transformed my life. Now, I still had many challenges soon after that. I still had to wait for the benzos to come out of my system. They came out 3 weeks later. I was able to then get into a heroin detox on the outskirts of Dublin. But when I landed there, it was like I was looking at the world through a different lens. Something had shifted. That moment of surrender, that letting go, had shifted something in my psyche. And I went to that detox with a sense of hope, a sense of energy, and a sense of curiosity about the human mind. I was like, something had awoken inside of me. Some kind of level of awareness just touched me. I can't explain what it was, but everything had changed. And I began reading books about psychology, self-awareness. I began meditating for the first time. I began speaking to a psychologist for the first time. And that was the start of my journey into exploring the human mind. Now, I got out of detox. I continued to read the books. I went to do a degree in psychology. But after so many years of addiction, I was struggling to navigate the real world on a very practical level. So I began designing a program that would help me to navigate my own life. I called it a program for life. And it worked. It really did work. It helped me to become a neuroscientist, a doctor of psychology, to write a book, lecturing positions in Trinity College and UCD. I'm actually an executive coach to some of Ireland's most senior leaders. I still pinch myself at that one, asking me for emotional help. That's crazy. But most of all, and this is the topic we've touched on many times today, the biggest success I've had in my own life is that I've completely changed my relationship with anxiety. I enjoy anxiety today. What a statement that is to make. It's my teacher, it's my friend, it's a signal of potential or perceived danger. I felt a little bit of anxiety before I was doing that talk, but I used my toolbox and all of a sudden I felt calm and I felt zen. I still experience anxiety, but I've changed my relationship with it. And that really is the key when it comes to addiction, when it comes to mental health problems for me. It's about changing your relationship with it. Now, to bring this back, some of the trends that we've talked about today, and it's really interesting looking at the research. It's been mentioned many times. Acute anxiety is intensifying. And 1 in 3 people are experiencing it either frequently or all of the time. Now, what is going to happen there? People are going to want to escape and avoid that emotional and psychological discomfort. It makes sense. That's the essence of addiction. So it's no surprise that substance use as an effect of anxiety has doubled. And the higher anxiety rises, the more you will see the effect of substance misuse. They're so linked. It's incredible. And one of the biggest things from that research that I found really interesting, because it really vibed with me in terms of my own journey, is that so many family members in the workplace are struggling, or so many people in the workplace are struggling because they have loved ones, brothers, sisters, parents, kids that are struggling with addiction. And I have first-hand experience of bringing that pain to my parents, to my family. My mum and my sister still struggle with the trauma that I brought into their lives. But when I found recovery, I found I had loved ones that were in addiction as well. And it's still, you feel so powerless because it's so difficult to help other people in addiction. So these statistics are really, really important. They really are. And to see them growing is something that we really have to get to the bottom of today. So how can we help? And first of all, what we have to do is we have to learn how to spot addiction in the workplace. One of the biggest challenges for me, when you looked at that picture earlier on, the people closest to me didn't see me getting worse every single day because they were too close to the situation. So it's hard to pick up the signs. That's one of the biggest difficulties. But what we have to look at, there is certain signs. The first thing you will see, personality changes. People will be more irritable. Lies will creep in. They won't be as reliable. There will be appearance changes. People will be a bit more disheveled. They won't be looking after their personal hygiene as much. These are the little things that can creep in. Other factors include increased absenteeism and increased lates. That's a big factor. And that's something you can objectively look at. You'll also see people leaving the workplace, going for toilet breaks more often. They will just want to escape the environment that they're in. The essence of addiction is always escaping psychological and emotional pain. So you won't want people looking at you. This is a big challenge. And this brings me to the hybrid workplace and people working from home. Although it's brilliant to give people those opportunities, if somebody is struggling at home, they can use the hybrid model, or they can use working from home as a way to escape and avoid. I always think about those small percentages of people that are sort of always working from home now, whether it's introversion, whether it's addiction, whether it's anxiety. They will use that as their tool to stay at home. It's going to be very hard to capture those people, to find out if they're struggling and find out how you can help. So there's a couple of tools or a couple of ideas to help to look at that. But it's really difficult. I can't stress that enough. It's really difficult to, I suppose, approach those people based on those statistics, because it could be other factors that are going on as well. So this is one of the biggest challenges that we have. So how do we go about helping people struggling with addiction? And this is one of the biggest challenges we'll ever face. I wish I had a magic wand, and even though I've been through that experience, even though my younger brother, the one who was holding me on the floor when I found recovery, I realised he had a terrible cocaine addiction. He was in the depths of addiction and I couldn't help him. I tried, I preached, but he got further and further away. And there's a framework that I have for addiction that I think about this, because the biggest question I get on a regular basis is coming from parents, usually parents that will say, how can I help my kids, or how can I help my loved ones? They are struggling with addiction. And they think I have the answer, but I don't. But I do have a framework that can help people in addiction and can help people who are struggling with loved ones in addiction. And I call it the 3 seeds. The first seed is the talking seed. And it's what I tried to do in the early phases of my recovery with my brother. I preached, I talked, I tried to fix, and I told them what they had to do. He had to do. But again, at its core, addiction is an underlying suffering. There's a root cause. And the drug or the substance or the behaviour, for that matter, is just an armour, a protective coping strategy to deal with that pain. So if you're trying to tell somebody what to do, you need to do this, you need to make this decision, you need to go into treatment, you're literally getting their armour and pulling it away. They're not going to like that. They're going to fight back. You'll get aggression, you will get anger, and they will pull further and further and further away. So the talking seed does not work. It really doesn't work. Trying to preach, trying to talk does not work unless they're asking for advice. The second seed is the listening seed. And this is difficult because it's passive. You can't make someone listen to you. But the listening seed is really powerful because people at their core want to be seen and want to be heard. So if you provide the space and say, look, if anything's going on, I just want to let you know I'm here if you want to talk. And if they do come and talk to you, you've got to listen to understand, not to fix, not to reply, not to respond, not to preach and tell them what to do. Just help them to feel heard and seen. And what will happen as a result of that? They will want to come back again and again, because it's not going to be fixed in one conversation. It's going to be long term. So if they feel heard and they feel that you have their back, you are supporting them, they will come back and chat again. And that's probably the best we can actually do. But the third seed is the action seed. And the action seed is not for them. The action seed is for you. And this is really important for family members, because you've got to get your own house in order. I often get people coming up to me and say, my kids or my partner, they're really struggling with anxiety. And they're coming up to me in a ball of anxiety. And they're asking me, what will I tell them to do? And I struggle to tell them, because I'm thinking, if I was them, I wouldn't be listening to you to give me tips on anxiety. You've got to get your own house in order first. So I think it's really important for especially family members of people struggling in addiction. You cannot control what they do. You are absolutely powerless. But you can control your response, how you respond to the situation. Look after your mental health. Look after your physical health. Look after how well you are in yourself, and it will give you a better way to listen to them and to help them when they do come and look for help. So the best seed is the action seed. And what I found in my experiences was when I got my own house in order, the people that I loved that were struggling with addiction, they wanted to come to me and look for help. And I didn't go preaching, I listened, and when they asked for advice, I was able to give it to them. And I can thankfully say that out of all of my family, we were all addicted. And none of us are today. We're all in recovery. As a result of my own recovery, I kind of helped people and helped us all to plant the seeds throughout the whole family. But it didn't come from preaching and telling each other what to do. It came from listening, and it came from doing what we could do in the situation. So how can HR leaders, or how can the workplace support people in addiction? And this is really, really challenging. First of all, addiction is incredibly hard to treat. And that's really important to recognise. But it can be treated. The first thing I think HR leaders or the workplace can do is to create a safe space, a safe environment where people can talk, where you're breaking down the stigma, to create a culture that is psychologically safe and where people are going to be willing to come forward and talk. That's one of the most important things you can do. Secondly, you can provide opportunities to talk to therapists, to other mental health programs and stuff like that. And specifically, the one thing is to provide support for people where their family members are struggling with addiction. That's probably one of the easiest fixes in terms of getting them to accept that they cannot control the situation. It's not easy, but it's one of the things that are controllable from that perspective. So we can provide people with the time, the space. If they are seeking to go to treatment, that is brilliant, because that is the best predictor of recovery, is someone wanting to go to treatment themselves. So give them those opportunities. And that's what the workplace can do. But we've also got to be pragmatic here. We've got to look after the workplace as well. Like, this is fundamental in all of this. And as I said, addiction is incredibly hard to treat. I think it's 10% the amount of people that are in chronic addiction that actually recover. And those are the ones that actually go to treatment. Those are the statistics. So we've got to look at the reality of the situation. And the reality of the situation is that people that are struggling with addiction, whether it's alcoholism, whether it's substance abuse, they may be coming to the workplace and putting other people in danger. So this is a factor that needs to be taken into account. Another reality of the situation is that enabling doesn't work for anyone. It didn't work for me. It kept me in addiction for longer, potentially. Getting sacked for me was the catalyst for change. That set the ball rolling for me. So enabling doesn't work for the workplace, and it doesn't work for the person that's in addiction as well. There's this idea that I came about sometime. I was often a little bit confused between sympathy, empathy, and compassion, like, are they one of the same? And I came across a description of that, and it really helped me to clarify my thoughts on this. Sympathy is feeling sorry for someone. Empathy is feeling sorry, but also feeling their pain. Compassion is feeling someone's pain and wanting to do something about it. But compassion isn't soft. Compassion is hard, especially when it comes to addiction. If you leave the alcoholic on the floor instead of putting them into the bed, they're going to know they slept on the floor. If you leave the addict in the ditch and they wake up in the ditch, they're going to know, oh my God, my life is not going in a good direction. That's a compassionate approach. They're extreme examples, but sometimes we have to speak the truth. We've got to be compassionate, but it's tough love and it's doing the right thing. But something that I do want to leave HR people and people that are struggling with this challenge within their job, and it was touched on several times today, is the complexity of addiction. And that is one of the biggest challenges we face, because everyone's journey into addiction is different. There's a big difference between a 19-year-old doing cocaine and a 50-year-old drinking wine because they're going through a breakup. There's massive differences in that. There's also differences between the person that is actually dealing with the addiction. They will have a different framework, a different perspective, a different way of dealing with the problem. And it depends on the company where they work. If you're working for a charitable organisation, they're going to have more compassion for these challenges than a very high-performance culture that is about the bottom line. So it depends on the company as well. So what I would suggest to people is to create your own framework, your own values-based framework for dealing with the situation. So many things in my life, I create a values-based framework to deal with the world, because You can have your values, your North Star, how you want to do things, but the world pulls you off course. You will be under pressure at home, professionally. You will probably want to help that person who's struggling, but you'll be overwhelmed. You'll be getting pressure from the top to do your own thing. So think of a way that works for you. What would you like to do in that situation? And I think it's really important. You cannot take responsibility for the person in addiction. That just won't work. You'll pull yourself into a vortex. So you've got to be honest. You've got to be compassionate, not soft. You've got to be kind. I think that's really important to create that human connection. Empathetic. But you need to create a framework that this is how you deal with these situations. And it will give you a go-to when the struggles arise, because you will get pulled away by other factors. And it's really, really important. So think about what is your optimal way for dealing with this situation so you can fall back on this when the pressure is on. To close off, I want to finish on just one of the most important lessons from my life around addiction. And I often ask myself, was I addicted? 100% yes. Was I suffering? 100% yes. But most of all, I was lonely, I was isolated, and I was disconnected from the world. I couldn't cope with my emotions, so I numbed them for years. That's what people in addiction do. They're numbing their emotions. When you numb your emotions, you disconnect with people around you. You can be lonely in a crowded room, so alone. And there's a great line from a guy called Johann Hari. Sobriety is not the opposite of addiction. Connection is. So whatever you do, whatever you have to do, try to create that human connection and be kind while you're doing it. Thank you.